Rain pattered softly against the sidewalk as a small boy made his way home from school. His worn backpack hung heavily on his shoulders, and his sneakers splashed through puddles that reflected the gray afternoon sky. The downtown streets were busy with people hurrying home from work, umbrellas bobbing up and down like colorful mushrooms in the drizzle. The boy was running late for his shift at his family's corner store. He knew his mom would be worried. She always was when he didn't show up right after school. Their little shop was struggling, and every helping hand mattered, even if those hands belonged to a 10-year-old who could barely reach the top shelves without a step-stool. As he rushed past the bustling market district, something caught his eye. There, half hidden in a puddle near a newspaper stand, lay a dark leather wallet. It was soaked through, but even from a few steps away, he could see it was expensive. The kind of wallet his mom would say belonged to someone who didn't have to check their balance before buying groceries. His heart beating fast, the boy picked up the wallet. It was heavy, really heavy. His fingers trembled as he opened it, and his eyes widened. Inside, crisp bills were stacked neatly, more money than he ever seen outside of movies. He quickly counted $2,000. There were also several shiny credit cards, a driver's license, and what looked like important medical cards. For a moment, he stood frozen in the rain, water dripping from his hair onto the wallet. His mom's worried voice echoed in his head from that morning. "I don't know how we'll make rent this month." The money in his hands could solve so many problems. It could fix the store's broken refrigerator, buy new shoes to replace his worn-out ones, and maybe even get his mom that medicine she kept putting off buying because it was too expensive. But then another voice whispered in his mind, his father's. Before he passed away 2 years ago, he always said, "A person's real character shows up when nobody's watching." The boy looked around. The busy street was full of people, but nobody was paying attention to a kid holding a wet wallet. Nobody would ever know if he just slipped it into his backpack. His hands still shaking, but now for a different reason, the boy carefully closed the wallet and held it tight. He pulled out his old phone, the one that could only make calls and send basic texts, and dialed his mom's number. The store would have to wait. They had something more important to do first. As he waited for his mom to pick up, the boy watched people rush by, wondering if any of them had found the other wallets that might be out there, and what choices they had made. The rain continued to fall, but somehow, despite being soaked to the skin and knowing he'd missed the start of his shift, he felt warm inside. Sometimes the right choice was the hardest one, but his dad would have been proud. His mom's voice finally crackled through the phone. "Where are you?" "I've been worried sick." "Mom," he said, his voice steady despite his shivering, "I found something important. Something that belongs to someone else, and I need your help to return it." The rain seemed to fall softer now, and somewhere in the distance, a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, promising that even the gloomiest days could hold unexpected brightness. Standing in the family store's back room, the boy placed a wet wallet on a small wooden table. His mom stood next to him, her work apron still on, worry lines creasing her forehead. The store was empty except for the quiet hum of the old refrigerator that worked only half the time. $2,000, his mom whispered, touching the stack of bills with trembling fingers. She quickly pulled her hand back as if the money might burn her. The boy watched her face carefully, seeing the same struggle in her eyes that he'd felt on the street. Their tiny store's shelves were getting emptier each week, and the for rent sign in their apartment building's window haunted them every day. His mom sat down heavily in the creaky wooden chair, the weight of their problems visible in the slump of her shoulders. Just that morning, she'd been on the phone with the landlord, her voice quiet so her son wouldn't hear her asking for more time to pay. But he'd heard anyway. The walls in their apartment were too thin to keep secrets. The boy's stomach growled, reminding him that they'd been having smaller dinners lately. His mom called them portion control with a forced smile, but he knew better. He looked at the money again. $2,000 could buy a lot of groceries. It could keep the lights on, the roof over their heads, and maybe even fix that refrigerator that made scary noises at night. Remember what Dad used to say? He said suddenly, his voice small, but steady in the quiet room. His mom looked up, her eyes shining with tears she was trying not to show. Which of his many wise sayings? She asked, attempting a smile. He always told me that being poor doesn't make you poor in spirit, and that doing the right thing matters most when it's the hardest thing to do. The boy touched the wallet again, feeling the smooth leather under his fingers. He said that's when we show who we really are. His mom was quiet for a long moment, looking at her son with a mix of pride and something else. Maybe sadness, maybe love, maybe both. Then she straightened her shoulders, the way she did when she was about to do something important. Your father would be so proud of you right now, she said softly. I know I am. She reached for her old laptop, the one that sometimes took 10 minutes just to start up. Let's find out who this wallet belongs to. As they waited for the laptop to sputter to life, the boy thought about all the things they could do with that money. New shoes for school. A proper dinner. Maybe even a small birthday celebration next month, something they hadn't been able to afford last year. Each possibility felt like a tiny door closing, but somehow each closed made his heart feel lighter. The ancient laptop finally showed its blue screen, casting a gentle glow in the dimming back room. Outside, they could hear the traffic passing by, people going about their lives, unaware of the small battle being fought in a struggling corner store's back room. A battle between need and right, between survival and spirit. His mom reached over and squeezed his hand. Her palm was warm and familiar, rough from years of work, but still gentle. You know, she said, typing slowly with her free hand, being rich isn't about how much money you have. It's about being able to look in the mirror and be proud of who you see. The boy squeezed back, watching as she began searching for the wallet's owner. The money still sat there, tempting them, but it somehow seemed less important now. They had something better, each other, their integrity, and the warm memory of his dad's wise words guiding them through this moment. As the search began, the old refrigerator gave another worrying rattle, but for once, neither of them jumped at the sound. They were too busy doing what they knew was right, even if it meant their own struggles would continue. Sometimes, the boy thought, the richest moments come when you choose to stay poor in money, but wealthy in spirit. The old laptop's fan whirred loudly as the boy and his mom huddled together, squinting at the bright screen in their dimly lit back room. The driver's license in the wallet belonged to an elderly man, and his picture showed kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His address listed a retirement community on the other side of town, a place the boy sometimes passed on his way to school, with its neat gardens and peaceful walkways. Should we just go there? The boy asked, but his mom shook her head, pointing to the time. It was already getting dark outside, and they didn't want to show up unannounced at a stranger's home so late in the day. Instead, she carefully typed the man's name into a search engine. What they found made their hearts sink. The retirement community's website was easy enough to find, but getting through to anyone was proving impossible. The phone just kept ringing and ringing. They tried different numbers, each time hoping someone would pick up, but no luck. Wait, his mom said suddenly, scrolling through some search results. Look at this. She'd found a small news article from a few months ago. The elderly man was a retired doctor who had performed thousands of surgeries in his career. There was even a quote from him about how he still kept his medical cards with him everywhere, just in case someone needed emergency help. The boy pulled out the wallet again, now mostly dry, and looked at the medical cards tucked inside. He remembered how his dad had needed his medical cards when he was sick, how important they had been. Mom, he said quietly, what if he needs these cards right now? They tried the phone numbers again, this time with more urgency. While they waited through the rings, they could hear the evening traffic outside growing quieter, the day winding down. The store's bell jingled as their last customer left, but neither of them moved to lock up. This felt more important. Just when they were about to give up, a voice answered. The boy watched his mom explain their situation, her free hand fidgeting with her apron strings like she always did when she was nervous. Her face lit up suddenly. They'd gotten through to someone who knew the elderly man. "Oh no," she said after listening for a moment, her hand covering her mouth. She looked at her son with worried eyes. "He has an important medical procedure scheduled for tomorrow morning. He's been searching everywhere for his wallet. He needs those ID cards and medical information." The boy felt his chest tighten. He thought about all the times his dad had needed to show his medical cards at the hospital. How scared and worried everyone had been. He couldn't let someone else go through that fear. "We have to go now," he said firmly, already standing up. "Even if it's late." His mom nodded, grabbing her worn coat from the hook. They closed the store early for the first time in years. Usually they stayed open late trying to make extra money. But tonight was different. Tonight they had a mission. As they waited for the bus in the cool evening air, the boy held the wallet carefully. Inside was still all that money, enough to solve so many of their problems. But now, knowing about the elderly man, about his medical procedure, about how worried he must be, the money seemed less important than it had before. The bus ride would take 45 minutes, and they'd have to walk another 15 after that. It would be properly dark by the time they got there, and they'd be tired for school and work tomorrow. But sitting there, watching the city lights blur past the window, the boy felt a weird kind of peace. His dad had always said that doing the right thing wasn't about doing the easy thing. A light rain started falling again as their bus pulled away from the curb. Tomorrow's problems, the rent, the broken refrigerator, the empty shelves, would still be there. But right now, they were on their way to help someone who needed it even more than they did. And somehow, that made their own problems feel a little lighter, a little more manageable, even if just for tonight. The retirement community looked different in the evening light. Warm yellow windows dotted the building's face like friendly stars, and a security guard at the entrance smiled as the boy and his mom explained why they were there so late. He made a quick call, then waved them through with a thumbs up. Their footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway as they followed the guard's directions. The boy's heart was beating fast, not from the walk, but from nervousness. The wallet felt heavy in his coat pocket. What if the elderly man was angry they'd taken so long to bring it? What if he accused them of taking something from it? His mom must have sensed his worry because she squeezed his shoulder gently. "Remember," she whispered, "we're doing the right thing. That's all that matters." They found the right apartment and knocked softly. For a moment, there was silence, then shuffling footsteps approached the door. It opened to reveal a man from the driver's license photo, though he looked more tired in person. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the hallway light as his eyes moved from the boy to his mom, then to the wallet in the boy's outstretched hand. I found this near the market," the boy said, his voice smaller than he meant it to be. "We saw you have a medical procedure tomorrow, so we came right away." The elderly man's hands shook slightly as he took the wallet. He opened it slowly, checking through its contents. The boy held his breath, but then something unexpected happened. The man's eyes filled with tears. "Everything's there," the boy said quickly, worried the tears meant something was wrong. "All the money and cards. We didn't take anything, I promise." But the elderly man was shaking his head, still crying, but now with a smile on his face. "That's exactly why I'm crying, young fellow," he said softly. "You have no idea what this means." He invited them inside, and though it was late, something in his voice made it impossible to refuse. His apartment was neat but cozy, with medical books lining the shelves and a small table by the window where it looked like he'd been sitting and worrying. There were photos everywhere, of people in hospital beds smiling, of medical teams, of what looked like hundreds of grateful patients. "I've been a doctor for over 40 years, he explained, settling into his chair while they sat on his couch. "Helped thousands of people. But today, Someone helped me when I desperately needed it." He looked at the wallet again. "Do you know how many people must have passed by this wallet today?" The boy hadn't thought about that. He remembered how busy the street had been, how many people had walked right by without noticing, or maybe they had noticed but chose not to stop. "And you," the elderly man continued, looking at them with kind eyes, "you came all this way, this late, just to return it." He paused, studying their worn clothes and tired faces. It couldn't have been easy, seeing all that money. The boy's mom spoke up then, her voice gentle but proud. "My son never even considered keeping it. He said his father taught him that character shows up when nobody's watching." The elderly man nodded slowly, thoughtfully. "Your father taught you well," he said to the boy. Then he noticed the time on his wall clock and sat up straighter. "And you brought this just in time. That medical procedure tomorrow. I'm not the patient. I'm actually the consultant. Another doctor needed my help with a complicated case, but without my medical licenses and ID." He shook his head. "You didn't just help me tonight. You helped someone else get the care they need tomorrow." As they stood to leave, the elderly man reached for his wallet again, but the boy's mom held up her hand. "No reward needed," she said firmly. "We did this because it was right, not for money." The look on the elderly man's face changed then, from surprise to something deeper, more thoughtful. He watched them walk to the door, this tired woman and her young son who had traveled across town to help a stranger, asking nothing in return despite their own obvious needs. "Wait," he called after them softly. "I think there's something else we need to talk about." The boy and his mom paused at the door, turning back to face the elderly man. He gestured for them to sit down again, his eyes twinkling with something that looked like a mix of excitement and relief. "There's something I need to tell you both," he said, settling back into his chair. "That wallet you found, it wasn't lost by accident." He smiled at their confused faces. "I left it there on purpose, and it wasn't the only one." The boy's mom leaned forward slightly. "I don't understand," he said. The elderly man reached for a small notebook on his side table. "After retiring from surgery, I felt lost. I had all this money saved up, but no real way to make sure it would truly help people." He opened the notebook, showing them a carefully drawn map of the city. "So I started a little experiment." He pointed to different spots marked on the map. "I left 5 wallets in different parts of the city. Each had the same amount of money, the same cards, the same everything. I wanted to see who would do the right thing, even when nobody was watching." He looked up at them, his eyes bright. "Do you know how many people returned the wallets?" The boy shook his head, completely caught up in the story. "Just one," the elderly man said softly. "You." The room fell quiet. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly painting shadows on the wall. The boy thought about all those other wallets, wondering where they had ended up, who had found them, what choices they had made. "But why?" his mom asked. "Why go through all this trouble?" The elderly man stood up slowly and walked to his bookshelf, pulling out what looked like building plans. "I've been planning to build a youth center in this city," he explained, spreading the papers on his coffee table. "A place where young people can learn, grow, and most importantly, develop strong character. But I needed to find the right people to help run it. People with real integrity, not just those who do the right thing when others are watching." He turned to the boy. "When you found that wallet, you were being tested without knowing it. And you passed in ways I never expected. You didn't just return it. You rushed across town because you were worried about someone else's medical needs. You refused the reward because you believed in doing right for its own sake." The boy's mom wiped a tear from her eye, but the elderly man wasn't finished. He looked at her too. "And you, raising such a son while struggling yourself. Teaching him values when it would have been easier to teach him survival. That's exactly the kind of wisdom this youth center needs." The plans on the table showed a beautiful building with classrooms, a library, sports areas, and meeting rooms. The boy could hardly believe what he was seeing. All this from finding a wallet in a puddle. Life tests us in small ways, the elderly man continued, and how we handle those small tests shows who we really are. You both showed me exactly what I've been looking for. He paused, smiling at their stunned faces. Now, about that corner store of yours. The boy felt his mom tense beside him. How did you know about our store? I did my homework after you called. Small business, struggling economy, just you two trying to keep it going. He nodded slowly. That makes your choice today even more impressive. And yes, I think that store of yours might be the perfect place to start something special in your neighborhood. As the elderly man began explaining his ideas, the boy looked at his mom. Her eyes were shining with tears again, but different tears this time. Hope tears, he thought. The kind that come when you realize that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, can lead to changes you never imagined possible. The morning sun streamed through the corner store's windows, making the dust dance in the light. The boy stood beside his mom behind the counter, both still trying to process everything that had happened since last night. The elderly man sat across from them, his kind eyes taking in every detail of their small store. You've kept this place going through tough times, he said, running his hand along the worn counter. That shows real determination. He pulled out a folder filled with papers and smiled. Now let's talk about how we can make it thrive. The boy watched as the elderly man laid out his plans. It wasn't just about money, though that was part of it. It was about turning their struggling store into something the whole neighborhood needed. A place that would work alongside the youth center he was building. Your store could be more than just a store, he explained, sketching ideas on a notepad. It could be a place where kids come after school to do homework, where neighbors meet and help each other, where young people learn about running a business while learning about integrity. The boy's mom wiped her hands nervously on her apron. But we can barely keep the lights on, she said softly. How could we possibly do all that? The elderly man's eyes twinkled. That's where I come in. I'm not just offering money. I'm offering a partnership. You've shown me something rare. Absolute honesty in a difficult moment. That's worth investing in. He talked about fixing the refrigerator first, then expanding the store's inventory. He mentioned something called educational programs and community outreach. Big words that made the boy's head spin a little, but his mom's eyes got wider with each explanation. And your son, the elderly man continued, turning to the boy with a warm smile. He's shown wisdom beyond his years. I'd like to set up a college fund for him. He held up his hand as the boy's mom started to protest. Consider it an investment in the future, just like this store. The broken ceiling fan whirred weakly above them, and somewhere in the back, the old refrigerator made its usual concerning noise. But somehow, these familiar sounds of a struggling store now felt like the last scenes of an old chapter, not the constant background of their lives. There's one condition, the elderly man said, his voice growing serious. You must help other young people learn what your son already knows, that character matters more than money, that doing the right thing has value beyond any dollar amount. The boy looked around their small store, seeing it through new eyes. He imagined kids his age sitting at new tables by the window, doing homework. He pictured the empty shelves filled with fresh food, the broken tiles replaced, the flickering lights fixed. But more than that, he imagined people coming together, learning from each other, growing stronger as a community. His mom's hands were shaking as she looked through the papers the elderly man had brought. This is too much, she whispered. But the elderly man shook his head. No, he said firmly. This is exactly right. Sometimes opportunities come in strange packages, like a lost wallet in a puddle. He smiled at the boy. Your son didn't just return a wallet yesterday. He showed me that the future I want to build is possible. That young people can still choose right over easy, kindness over convenience. The morning light grew stronger, and customers began to appear outside the store. But for a moment, none of them moved to open up. They sat there, three people brought together by a simple act of honesty, planning a future that felt like a dream but was quickly becoming real. The elderly man stood up, straightening his jacket. "Well," he said, "shall we get started? We have a lot of work to do, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning of something remarkable." The boy looked at his mom, saw the hope in her eyes mixing with happy tears, and knew their lives were about to change in ways they never could have imagined when he first spotted that wallet in the rain. 3 months had passed since that rainy evening when a boy found a wallet, and the neighborhood was starting to feel different. The old corner store, once dim and struggling, now glowed like a warm lighthouse on the street. Fresh paint brightened its walls, and a new sign hung proudly above the door: Community Corner, where neighbors become family. Inside, the transformation was even more striking. The broken refrigerator had been replaced with a humming new one, filled with fresh produce. The wobbly shelves now stood straight and strong, stocked with everything from school supplies to healthy snacks. But the biggest change wasn't in the things, it was in the people. Every afternoon, the store buzzed with activity. Kids spread their homework across new tables by the sunny windows, while high school students who knew their subjects well helped the younger ones. The boy's mom moved between the tables like a gentle breeze, offering encouragement and occasionally bringing over snacks to kids who she knew might not get dinner at home. The elderly man's story about the wallet had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. At first, people just came by to see if it was true. This tale of honesty, leading to such unexpected changes. But they stayed for something more important: the sense of community that was growing stronger each day. One afternoon, a local teacher walked in, tears in her eyes. She'd caught a student trying to cheat on a test. Instead of punishing him, she brought him to the store. The boy, who now helped run a daily study group, sat with the struggling student. "You know," he said, sharing a story about his dad's lessons on integrity, "sometimes the hardest choice and the right choice are the same thing." The elderly man visited often, watching with quiet satisfaction as his investment grew into something more valuable than money could measure. He'd started something called the Integrity Initiative at the store. Any kid who was caught doing the right thing, especially when it was difficult, got their story added to a colorful board on the wall. Soon, the board was overflowing with tales of found phones returned, bullying stopped, and small kindnesses shared. Other local businesses started to notice. The bakery down the street began donating day-old bread for after-school snacks. The bookstore owner offered to teach a weekly reading circle. Even the grumpy hardware store owner, who never seemed to smile, started dropping off supplies for kids' craft projects. One day, a small girl came running into the store, her face bright with excitement. She'd found a $5 bill on the playground. Instead of keeping it, she turned it in to her teacher. "I remember the wallet story," she told the boy proudly. "And I wanted to be brave like you." The boy's mom overheard this and had to turn away to wipe her eyes. Later, she told her son, "You didn't just return a wallet that day. You started a wave of goodness that's touching lives we don't even know about." The changes rippled out in unexpected ways. The local middle school invited the boy to speak about honesty. Parents started coming to the store asking for advice about teaching values to their kids. Even the local newspaper wrote a story about how one small act of integrity had sparked a community transformation. As evening fell one day, the boy stood outside the store, watching people walk by. Unlike before, they weren't hurrying past with their heads down. They were stopping to chat, helping each other carry groceries, greeting each other by name. The street felt alive with something more than just activity. It felt alive with hope. Inside, he could hear his mom laughing with a group of elderly ladies who had started a knitting circle in the store's new reading corner. They were teaching young girls how to knit while sharing stories about the neighborhood's history. The wall clock, a new one that actually kept the right time, showed it was almost closing time, but nobody seemed in a hurry to leave. The boy thought back to that rainy day and the wallet in the puddle. He remembered how heavy that choice had felt, not knowing that it would light up so many lives. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices, he realized. And sometimes doing the right thing creates ripples that turn into waves of good that touch shores you never even knew existed. 1 year had passed since the wallet discovery, and the store was hosting a special community dinner. Folding tables stretched across the newly expanded space, covered with dishes brought by neighbors. The smell of home-cooked meals filled the air, mixing with the sound of laughter and warm conversation. The boy stood near the window, helping younger kids serve themselves food. He'd grown taller over the year, but his friends said he'd grown in other ways too. These days, other kids came to him for advice, not just about homework, but about tough choices they faced. Remember last week, a small girl whispered to her friend while spooning mashed potatoes onto her plate. When he helped me tell the truth about breaking the classroom window, I was so scared, but he was right. Telling the truth felt better than hiding it. The boy's mom moved through the crowd, her step lighter these days. The worried lines that used to crease her forehead had softened. She no longer had to check her wallet anxiously before buying groceries or worry about keeping the lights on. But the biggest change was in her smile. It reached her eyes now, sparkling with pride and contentment. The store had become something nobody could have imagined a year ago. The back room, once cluttered with broken equipment, was now a cozy learning center. Retired teachers volunteered there, helping kids with their studies. The walls were covered with colorful posters showing both academic achievements and acts of kindness spotted in the community. Near the front counter, a group of teenagers huddled around a notebook. They were planning the store's first youth-led business workshop. "We'll teach other kids how to manage money," one explained excitedly. "But also about doing business with honesty, like we learned here." The elderly man sat in his usual corner, sipping tea and watching everything with twinkling eyes. He'd become like a grandfather to many of the neighborhood kids. They loved hearing him tell the story of the wallet test, especially the part about how only one person, their friend, had passed it. A local police officer stopped by during the dinner, not for any trouble, but to share good news. "Youth crime in the neighborhood is down 60%, he announced proudly. "Whatever you're doing here, it's working better than any program we've tried." The boy's old teachers barely recognized him now. Not just because he'd grown taller, but because of his confidence. His grades had soared, not from any sudden brilliance, but from the quiet determination he developed. "It's like he discovered his own worth," one teacher told his mom. "And now he helps others find theirs." The store's success had sparked changes throughout the neighborhood. Other shops started their own community programs. The empty lot down the street was becoming a community garden. Even the graffiti that used to cover walls had been replaced with colorful murals painted by local kids. Later that evening, as the dinner wound down, the boy found himself sitting with his mom and the elderly man. They watched as neighbors helped clean up. Kids packed leftover food for families who couldn't make it, and teenagers planned next week's activities. "You know," the elderly man said softly, "when I left those wallets around the city, I hoped to find one honest person to help run the youth center. Instead, I found something better. I found a way to help an entire community remember its own goodness." The boy's mom reached for her son's hand. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you'd walked past that wallet that day." The boy squeezed her hand, thinking about all the changes of the past year. He thought about the kids who now had a safe place to study, the families who had found support, and the neighborhood that had remembered how to be a community again. "I don't think I could have walked past it," he said simply. "Dad always said we're all connected, like links in a chain. Helping others isn't just the right thing to do, it's how we make the whole chain stronger." Through the window, they could see the sunset painting the sky in beautiful colors. The neighborhood looked different in this light, not just because of the physical changes, but because of the spirit that now lived in its streets, its people, and its heart. 5 years had passed. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the high school auditorium, where crowds of proud families filled every seat. The boy, now a young man, stood at the podium in his graduation gown, looking out at the sea of familiar faces. He was giving the graduation speech not just because he had the highest grades, but because his story had become a symbol of something bigger than himself. Looking down at his notes, he took a deep breath and began to speak from his heart. 5 years ago, I found a wallet in a puddle. He started, his voice clear and steady. I didn't know it then, but that moment would change not just my life, but our entire community. In the front row, his mom sat with tears in her eyes, wearing a new dress she'd bought from her now thriving store. Next to her, the elderly man, a bit more stooped now, but his eyes still twinkling, smiled encouragingly. Around them sat hundreds of people whose lives had become intertwined with their story. People sometimes ask me if I regret not keeping the money, he continued. $2,000 seemed like all the money in the world to a kid from a struggling family. But what we got instead? He paused, looking around the auditorium. That was worth more than any amount of money could buy. He gestured to his classmates. Look at us now. 10 of us are going to college on scholarships from the community foundation that grew from that one act of honesty. Our neighborhood, once known for its struggles, is now famous for its community spirit. The store had grown into something beautiful. It wasn't just a shop anymore, it was the heart of the neighborhood. The youth center next door, finally completed 2 years ago, bustled with activity every day. Together, they'd helped countless kids find their path, just as he had found his. But the real change wasn't in buildings or programs, he said, his voice growing softer. It was in how we began to see ourselves and each other. We learned that integrity isn't just about doing the right thing when nobody's watching. It's about believing in the good that can come from those choices. He told them about the ripple effects, how the store's success had inspired other neighborhoods to start similar programs, how their community model was being studied by cities across the country, how the wallet story had become a lesson taught in local schools about the power of honest choices. My father used to say that being poor in money doesn't mean being poor in spirit, he shared, his voice catching slightly. He passed away before he could see all this, but his words lived on. They guided me that rainy day, and they guide our community now. The elderly man nodded slowly, remembering how his own experiment with the wallets had led to something far greater than he'd imagined. What started as a test of character had become a catalyst for change that touched thousands of lives. As we graduate today, the young man continued, we carry with us more than just diplomas. We carry the knowledge that the smallest choices can have the biggest impacts. That doing the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, can light up not just our own path, but the paths of others we might never meet. He looked at his mom, seeing in her proud smile all the struggles they'd overcome together. The store that once barely survived now supported dozens of families. The neighborhood that once felt broken now felt whole. 5 years ago, I found a wallet in a puddle, he concluded. But what I really found was a truth, that when we choose integrity over easy answers, when we believe in each other's goodness, when we hold on to hope even in hard times, that's when real change begins. And that change. He smiled, looking at all the faces he'd grown to know and love. That change can last for generations to come. As he finished speaking, the auditorium erupted in applause. But it wasn't just clapping. It was the sound of a community celebrating its own transformation, a transformation that began with one boy's simple choice on a rainy afternoon 5 years ago. The wallet story would be told for years to come, not just as a tale of honesty, but as proof that the smallest acts of integrity could bloom into the most beautiful changes. And somewhere, in every retelling, a new seed of hope would be planted, ready to grow into something wonderful of its own.